Hi, my name is Kameron Sanzo, and I am a PhD candidate in English at the University of California, Riverside. My dissertation argues that the Victorian period marks a turning point in the linguistic and infrastructural representation of the Western energy concept. Victorian literary and scientific archives actively co-create a dominant model of energy as natural law. And this model settles in the infrastructures that govern our experiences of modernity. My presentation today argues for a need to destabilize the language and literature of efficiency, specifically in recycling infrastructures. So I'm going to get my PowerPoint up. Okay. Efficiency is a double-edged sword. Although we tend to align energy efficiency with environmentalism, as in a car's eco mode or Energy Star certified home appliances, efficiency cannot be uncoupled from capitalism's predatory relations, including its insistence on using the planet as a cheap resource for accumulation. Efficiency concerns feel particularly apropos to the existential demands of climate change, yet most energy efficiency claims exploit contradictions baked into energy rhetoric that we encounter almost daily, but that we may or may not register. On the one hand, fossil fuel companies like BP, ExxonMobil, and Consul brand themselves as energy companies in an attempt to suppress their complicity in an increasingly unpopular carbon regime. They underscore a commitment to conservation by producing less waste. On the other hand, corporate efficiency tactics usually amount to greenwashing maneuvers. As Rob Nixon puts it, quote, "Gargantuan transnational corporations have wised up to the kudos that they can gain from greenwashing in the countries of the rich. Meanwhile, back on planet Earth, they persist with their profitable devastation of the relatively impoverished, less regulated societies that have little visibility and recognition value in the rich country corporate media," end quote. We've seen this in BP's Beyond Petroleum campaign and Consul Energy's Clean Coal Initiative, for example. Such strategies often employ the language of energy as a linguistic pivot to erase the violence of fossil fuel capitalism. This presentation explores the emergence of what I call the efficiency narrative, or the expansion-motivated fiction of energy conservation. To do this, I argue that we need an understanding of energy's emergence as a socio-political apparatus in the 19th century. Despite our relatively recent admission of anthropogenic climate change, the Victorians felt the scale of industrialization's environmental disruptions and invoked the then new science of thermodynamics to manage their changing planet. While energy's metaphors have evolved with time and changes in science, we can trace an enduring efficiency narrative back to the initial emergence of thermodynamic laws and the culture that produced energy's legibility. So in what follows, I argue that an efficiency narrative was constructed out of the conflicting cosmological, industrial, and political imperatives baked into the first iteration of thermodynamics. Because energy is a fungible and yet elementally invisible part of the universe, early energy physicists applied the laws and logic of their own worldviews to construct the language of a dominant Western energy concept. 19th century efficiency rhetoric emerges forcefully in the dust economy of early to mid-Victorian London, where coal ash and household waste, or dust, were collected and recycled for profit. Although the dust economy collapsed by the early 20th century, we can observe the vestiges of dust profit-motivated conservation in our own energy-focused century. These 19th century representations of energy politics and efficiency are particularly crucial to excavate because the literature of modern infrastructural standards retain elements of 19th century market-mediated recycling, mobilizing contradictory energetic language to mask their environmental violence and to leverage recycling's market value. Because we do not experience energy as finite, measurable units, we therefore study energy by the effects it produces and by its relational qualities. In a much longer version of this project, I detail the approaches of early energy physicists and argue that because the science of energy employed a great deal of figurative language to describe phenomena like heat, light, and electromagnetism, energy consequently has the power to assimilate into many different worldviews. Its politics naturalize and disappear over time when we frame them into thermodynamic natural law or build them into our modern infrastructural experiences. In this presentation, I will not devote time to the history of energy, its etymology, and its incorporation in physics, although these are important factors in generating the core tenets of the energy concept we now recognize. Instead, I want to consider the initial codification of the two thermodynamics laws. The two laws of thermodynamics are now a catechism of modern physics. First law, usually called the conservation of energy law, says that in a closed system, energy can be neither created nor destroyed. It just transfers between forms, yet remains consistent in amount. And the second law is usually what we call the entropy law, although when the law was originally codified, entropy was not yet a coined term. The term came to us in 1865 by Rudolf Clausius, yet the codification of the second law happened in the early 1850s. So the entropy law says that the amount of concentrated work available energy in a closed system decreases as entropy tends towards a maximum, or while the amount of energy remains consistent, it moves down a natural gradient from availability towards diffuseness. And this is why restoring a closed system to a higher state of order requires an outside input of energy. Now, we can think of this alternatively in terms of the fate of the universe, because if we take the universe as a closed system, this is why the universe naturally works towards a state of cold, workless equilibrium or heat death. And when we learn these laws now, they usually appear to us in their sparest form, denuded of their cultural and historical associations. But this rendering here in this slide is not how the thermodynamic laws were published. They actually appeared more like this. And my caveat here is that they were assembled over the course of a decade or so and are scattered throughout several key documents. And so this on this slide is my paraphrase. So the conservation law said pretty much something like this. All energy in the universe is conserved. Only the creator may create and destroy energy. And if we suspect that a system has lost energy, the missing amount will appear elsewhere and in a different form. This comes to us principally from from James Prescott Joule. And Joule was not really concerned with where the energy went. He just basically said if some energy is lost due to friction or whatnot, God knows where it is, and that's fine. It'll appear elsewhere in a different form. Now, the law of dissipation, or the second law of thermodynamics, comes to us from a variety of different sources, but it is codified principally by William Thomson, who later becomes Lord Kelvin. And Kelvin, or Thomson at this point, is really interested in where that energy goes, right? So Thomson says there is a universal tendency towards the dissipation of energy. Energy transfers result in progressively less concentrated forms. Only the creator may restore energy to its original concentration or position. And therefore, we must use our natural energy stores judiciously, directing each transfer to the benefit of mankind. So there are several key differences to note here. Besides the obvious theological overtones, these laws carry real moral weight. Note that the second law in particular acknowledges a universal tendency for energy to move towards progressively less concentrated and therefore less useful forms, but this law also underscores a human imperative to do something with that inevitability. And again, it was William Thomson who published this law, formally synthesizing his findings with those of James Joule and Rudolf Clausius. In 1852, Thomson presented a short series of papers to the Royal Society of Edinburgh that clarified what he called the dissipation of mechanical energy as a universal tendency in nature. As Joule demonstrated, energy is conserved in quantity. However, as steam engines evidence daily in Thomson's experience as a Glasgow engineer, some energy can never be recovered. And as a Scottish Presbyterian, Thomson asserted that although only God has the power to restore energy to its useful forms, it was man's responsibility to harness and direct the energies available to ensure society's progress. So Thomson says, Quote, whatever be the nature of these energetic tendencies, consciousness teaches every individual that they are to some extent subject to the direction of his will. So then Thomson identifies a number of energy stores like fossil fuels in the sun and insisted that it's our job to ensure that these energies are, quote, directed to produce the desired mechanical effects. So he really believed that poorly directed resource transformation creates energetic waste, even though it never alters the quantity of energy in the universe. So I want to point out the word dissipation here. Thomson selected this word to describe the energetic tendency towards diffuseness, but dissipation was also a common 19th century term to modify subjects as wasteful, unproductive, or frittered out. The second law, therefore, attaches wasteful and morally degraded connotations to heat diffusion and power loss. This slippage between social and scientific spheres was not irregular. 19th century physics attempted to unify its objects under an umbrella of mechanical explanations, yet attempts to describe energy in mechanical terms only generated figurative language, or otherwise language that carried weight across social and mechanical domains. So a question arises here. When dealing with objects too numerous to count, too far away to observe directly, or too tiny to access, how do our mathematical and representational aids participate in producing the knowledge we accept as truth? I would argue that Thomson's representation of what we understand as thermodynamics binds the sun and directional transformation in a moral and even cosmological imperative to conserve energy, and this is the efficiency narrative that we should recognize. Thomson intends for natural energy stores to assist Britain's progress as a nation. Energetic efficiency, social, economic, and mechanical, is vital to that vision. Because energy was so universalizing, so all-encompassing, it was believed that a single set of laws now governed the social and material spheres, uniting all domains of knowledge. 19th century infrastructural developments grew out of a moral imperative to identify and root out waste, and then to capitalize on efficiency by maximizing growth and resource power. So right now, you're looking at an image of a 19th century dust yard where your household trash and hearth ash would have been taken if you'd lived in Victorian London. Dust yards are perhaps best known for their appearance in Charles Dickens's Our Mutual Friend, and also for their representation in art. This here is E.H. Dixon's 1837 watercolor of the dust heap at King's Cross. And it gives us an example of this bygone phenomenon. It's currently housed in the Wellcome Collection in London. The system of recycling dust developed in response to changes in the market value of constituent waste products. Industrial processing used coal dust as a raw material for building resources like bricks and for agricultural fertilizers. Some manufacturers incorporated non-coal refuse into various luxury commodities like jewelry, dyes, soaps, and perfumes. The system was profitable for the City of London, whose population had surged in response to Britain's increased reliance on coal energy. More people in the city meant more domestic coal expenditure, leaving London to deal with the nuisance of smoke and coal dust. In the case of dust, those with the startup capital obtained permission from local parishes to collect it, along with the rest of the city's garbage, and turn it into wealth. The dust economy's promise of removing and resurrecting discarded items in hearth ash captivated Londoners. Popular middle-class periodicals like Castle's Magazine, Household Words, and All the Year Round published journalistic and fictional accounts of dust yards and dust work. These pieces appear side by side with popular science articles explaining the new thermodynamics laws. Such genre juxtaposition lays bare the ways in which scientific popularizers echoed the contradictory gospel of waste romanticism and energy dissipation, and the ways that recycling structures reproduced a thermodynamic worldview. Recycling programs like dust contracting did not conserve resources to limit expenditure. Rather, they turned dust into a cheap raw material to further accumulation. And the more London grew, the more dust there was to collect. So until the market collapsed, dust contracting was a very lucrative enterprise. Now, contractors, of course, needed laborers to sift and sort through their dust, so dust work became an established profession for working class individuals. This demanding physical labor required workers to remain outside all day and in all seasons. But the glamour of finding a will, precious metals, or a banknote hidden in mountains of garbage attached itself to middle-class narratives of dust work. These accounts foreground both the immense potential of dust to uplift and transform, and its equal power to degrade. It is in the contrast between dust workers and the materials they process that middle-class dust narratives issue their most forceful thermodynamic language. As Tina Choi argues in her work on sanitary reform, waste objects may climb the social ladder, but humans seldom do. Dust workers face the additional social challenge of confronting an environment that Victorians considered unhealthy and degrading. Because Victorians believed that environmental conditions influence social circumstances, one reason for the dust economy's decline was London's sanitary reform, which gained momentum as the value of coal dust depreciated with decreased demand. Indeed, dust work was controversial labor for many middle-class observers. In her piece on dust women published in the Economic Journal, Emily Hobhouse assesses the popular opinion that women were unfit for such unclean work. Emily Hobhouse's language is laden with contradictions. Her article cannot affirm whether dust work is salubrious for women or harmful to their health and social prospects. These women are described as ruddy, sturdy, and bright-eyed, for instance. Hobhouse contrasts their constitution with, quote, the pallor and haggard looks of the ordinary London worker, end quote. Yet they suffer from constant exposure to the elements and from sore throat and eyes. The dust erodes these women at the same time that it rejuvenates them. It dissipates them at the same time that it revitalizes them. And yet, dust yards are both vile and glamorous. Hobhouse announces that, quote, the history of refuse is a veritable romance, and a certain glamour has encircled a dust yard, a feeling that unknown possibilities lie hid in a pile of rubbish. Hobhouse uses active language to describe the refuse. It springs from the dust heap in its resurrection, while the women who process it remain node-like in this transaction. They abet dust's transformation, but do not inject dust with its power to evolve. There's something deeply contradictory, then, in both the aesthetics and the physics of efficiency romance. Hobhouse cannot ultimately position the dust yard as a factor of dust women's personal degeneration or of their ruddy health. However, she also situates dust work in a sentimental fiction where dust women contribute to waste social mobility, though they themselves are stationary actors in that network. Middle-class accounts like this discuss the potential of dust to become something else or to reveal something hidden. The notion that some otherwise decaying object lies hidden awaiting human discovery also follows coal from its dormancy underground to its afterlife on the dust heap. Scientific literature at both expert and popular levels bolstered recycling's efficiency contradictions by situating them within energy's already politicized language. While Britain's eminent scientists underscored the national priority of keeping coal a cheap and available resource, popular science writers broadcast this gospel to the masses, publishing articles along middle-class improvement pieces. A good example of this is a lecture Thomas Henry Huxley delivered in its ripple effects into the scientific community. Huxley's On the Formation of Coal is a history of coal development in the Carboniferous period, but with a forceful compound interest metaphor at the end. Huxley contends, the English people grew into a powerful nation, and nature still waited for a full return of the capital she had invested in the ancient club bosses. But what becomes of the coal which is burnt in yielding this interest? Heat comes of it, light comes of it, and if we could gather together all that goes up in the chimney and all that remains in the grate of a thoroughly burnt coal fire, we should find ourselves in the possession of a quantity of carbonic acid, water, ammonia, and mineral matters exactly equal in weight to the coal. She has paid back principal and interest at the same time, and she straightway invests the carbonic acid, the water, and the ammonia in the new forms of life, feeding with them the plants that now live. Thrifty nature, surely no prodigal but most notable of housekeepers. So here, Huxley ties coal directly to the destiny of the English people. He implies that coal left in the ground is an untapped and otherwise wasted resource. Moreover, when coal is burned for fuel, its sooty byproducts are somehow mathematically and energetically equal to coal in its pre-burned state. This is just one example of many issued from the scientific community that to use natural resources without reaping their maximum potential for progress would be a natural disgrace. Such lessons were not lost on scientific popularizers who informed the public of advancements in physics, including the new laws of conservation and dissipation. The sun features in these articles as paradoxically a limitless source of power and a time-sensitive waste of heat. an unattainable source of energetic potential with an expiration date. An all-the-year-round contributor uses theological overtones to efface human and non-human labor in energetic transactions. By describing the sun as a great maker of all things, this author directly echoes Huxley's compound interest metaphor. Coal is, quote, solar light and heat put into a savings bank ages upon ages ago. It is power and action from the sun imprisoned in the bowels of the earth. Yet, notice the removal of actual laboring bodies in these energetic transactions. As this author continues, quote, your sugar is crystallized sunshine from Jamaica, your tea, quinine, coffee, and spice are embodiments of solar influences shed on the surfaces of China, Peru, and the Indian archipelago. But how grand and beautiful is the theory that all material blessings here below come to us entirely and alone from the sun. The act of acknowledging solar power as the source of all raw materials and commodities is a maneuver which applies the authority of thermodynamics to erase uncompensated labor. Workers, environments, and lifeways are actors in energy transactions, but they themselves are not viewed as sources of power. Each worker's individual action generates some consequence, but priority is placed on whether the system, that is the nation here, can grow efficiently. So this brings us to energy and efficiency now. So what you're looking at right now is the logo for BP's Infinia program. Its new depolymerization process that deconstructs plastic waste into monomer building blocks for new plastics. In December 2019, BP announced its involvement in a consortium of corporations joining forces to create a new closed-loop recycling program. Rita Griffin, Chief Operations Officer of Petrochemicals, claims that Infinia will keep plastics in an infinitely recyclable loop, thereby reducing landfill waste as well as minimizing oil extraction for new plastics. BP's recycling agenda is easy to take for granted and perhaps even to praise when we operate from within the comfort zone of a 20th and 21st century energy regime. We might say that energy companies are adjusting to shifting markets and planetary damage by choosing to emphasize efficiency and recycling. However, BP's Infinia program is riddled with the limitations of an energy-efficient future as imagined by an oil giant. It simply perpetuates an eco-conscious image that is paid off in the company's net worth. So, like the dust economy, modern recycling infrastructures exploit efficiency's ideological contradictions by turning waste into another cheap resource. As I work towards a conclusion now, I want to demonstrate how the literature of modern infrastructure space has absorbed the politicized rhetoric of thermodynamics. Modern recycling is regulated by technical standards produced by non-governmental and global mega organizations such as the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO. By controlling technical standards, including those of recycling, ISO has steadily and consistently governed the infrastructure of modern spaces. Commercial recycling must follow ISO 14040, the life cycle assessment. That is a standard available for purchase only. So ISO profits from virtually ubiquitous enforcement of their standards, and private organizations benefit from ISO's market-driven structure. Industrial ecologists have been critical of ISO's standards, pointing out that ISO's language for recycling reinforces the notions that there is an equivalency between recycled and primary materials, and that the environmental impacts of reprocessing are smaller than those of initial production. And this is a misconception demystified in the 19th century. In The Coal Question, published in 1865, William Stanley Jevons makes perfectly clear that increased industrial efficiency exacerbates resource exhaustion. We don't use less primary material when we recycle, or when industrial processes are more efficient. Jevons' concern was simply that we extract more economic value from the coal that we use. Today, however, part of the problem is ISO's divide between what are called open and closed-loop recycling processes. In the former, products are converted into raw materials distinct from the pre-recycled commodity, in addition to some unrecoverable waste. And in the latter, pre-recycled materials become the same or similar products after recycling, and BP Infinia qualifies as such. Life cycle assessment literature reinforces the sustainability of closed-loop logic, despite its failure to generate less waste than open loop processes. The ISO endorsed misconceptions of closed loop recycling perpetuate waste romanticism at the same time that they grant corporations the opportunity to profit from waste markets. Like the Victorian dust economy, reconstituting waste does not limit net expansion or fossil fuel expenditure, as recycling processes may not disclose the energetic requirements of their operations. Moreover, from this description of open versus closed loop recycling, it is clear that the Victorian dust economy was not a closed loop recycling operation. However, it sustains as a model for waste management resource efficiency. In the journal Waste Management, dust yards are praised as closed loop systems that we should revisit or even emulate in certain circumstances. We know that dust yards did not function as ISO-specific closed loops, nor do closed loops prevent overall energy expenditure. Therefore, we should ask what is at stake in a loop's containment, energetic or economic waste. As we have seen, in the 19th century, there was little distinction. This is why these contradictions today are so troubling. A company can claim to reduce waste production by diverting currently unrecyclable plastic from the fate of landfills or incineration without disclosing the energetic requirements of their processes or those of the other industrial processes in their consortium. We therefore need to be prudent about the stories we tell and become aware of their power to obscure some realities and reinforce others. This is true for the literature of energy's infrastructure and for the infrastructures represented in our most popular literatures. Literature inspires public interpretation of energy systems and also reveals the contradictions written within thermodynamic law. The 19th century, I believe, is both the problem and the answer in this case. By destabilizing an efficiency narrative emerging from the rhetoric of Victorian thermodynamicists, we become equipped to understand and deconstruct the naturalized contradictions of energy language in our own moment. Thank you.